Okay, so this is part 3, the direct painting layer. So this is where we actually start putting on opaque layers of paint. So we're covering the reserve. So you'll see here I'm mixing kind of a dark middle gray to match that dark gray shadow. Then I'm laying in a light middle gray and putting it next to the dark gray shadow. And then while both are wet, I blend vertically along the seam, and that gives me a smooth transition from light into dark. You'll notice that white is on one side and black is on the other, and I'm creating a little bit of a gradation scale in my mixing zone on the palette. Here I'm putting in some stripes that will stand for that kind of ribbed texture that you see on the cup. Cleaning my brush a lot, wiping it off a lot. Similar gradation in the eye socket of the deer skull. Always going back to that middle gray in between the white and the black. The closer I get to black, the darker gray you get. The closer I get to white on the palette, the lighter gray. You can see here I'm going over the skull with kind of a light gray. I felt like maybe the cup was a little bit too dark, and then I changed my mind and went back to dark. Notice that I'm going right over the front rim of that cup with the inside of the cup. That's because the rim is in front of the inside of the cup. So instead of trying to be precise, I can pull that rim right back over, and the paint layer that's inside the cup will be actually behind the layer of the cup that's in front of the inside of the cup. So you're really thinking spatially when you're laying your paint down. What's underneath, what's on top. Paint what's underneath, underneath. Paint what's on top, on top. Don't paint up to edges. We're not in kindergarten. We're not doing coloring books here. So you have to think spatially. So I laid down kind of a middle gray, middle light gray, and then while it's white, I put in some of those lighter tones, really light lights. Still not all the way to white yet, or black for that matter. So you're kind of in the middle range of the value spectrum, from dark gray all the way up through light gray. The whites and the blacks kind of come in the last phase as you're tweaking things and refining things. That doesn't mean you can't put blacks and whites down. It's just, while it's all open, that means worked or workable, it's going to kind of get in a low contrast zone. So there you saw me paint the drapery over the skull. Now I'm pulling the skull back on top of the drapery, using the positive and the negative space to shape my objects. So it's not about just drawing the object or the edge of the object. It's also about using the negative, the space behind the object, to shape the object itself. You also notice that I'm kind of working back and forth between shapes. So I went to the skull, and then to the drapery, and then back to the skull again. And I'm keeping those edges really open. See, I made a little bit more of a refinement there. Oh, and I forgot to mention I'm using a smaller brush as I get into the smaller details, which makes sense. So in that rough-in phase previously, we used a large brush because we weren't going for details. We were going for big generalities. Now I'm using a 4 brush because we're a little bit tighter. I can already tell that I've gone too dark on the bottom part of this red cloth, but that's okay. I can adjust. You see me here getting those lighter zones and adjusting that dark. Pushing the black behind or underneath the drapery so that the drapery itself seems lighter. See how I lifted that value up. When I say lifted up, I mean lightened. I think when I say lifted up, I mean made it come forward or created higher contrast. So I pulled out the light and pushed back the dark. That's something you'll hear talked about a lot in painting, push and pull. Pulling it out towards the viewer, pushing it back away from the viewer. I might be getting a little bit too fussy, which sometimes you can find yourself doing. And then you'll get frustrated, which usually means you need to move on to another area. So I do. It all needs to be covered at some point. What you're doing is you're creating a kind of fill layer, a more complex value map. Instead of tone or local value, you're getting into the gradations and modulations of tone. And that fill layer is going to create a smoother surface because it's going to cover up more of the tooth of the canvas. That's the texture. And that'll make it easier to blend when we get into the next layer. Notice how I'm painting the dark that's in between the teeth. I'm not painting the teeth, I'm painting the dark that's behind. I'll pull the teeth over it. So pushing that dark back and then pulling the teeth lighter on top. And my brush off, wiping it off, because I'm going to get some more light. Sometimes you might find that you want to heighten. So perhaps that red tone is not quite that light, but sometimes you want to just kind of push it. Remember, every time you're blending, you're lifting your brush and you're using less pressure than when you lay the paint down, which usually indicates a little more pressure. There you saw me push back the shadow and pull forward the nose. You'll see me do it a lot around the eyes and eyebrows in a moment, where I'll paint the shadow underneath and then pull the light on top of it. I'm essentially doing the same that I did with the cup. As far as the inside of the face jug is similar to the inside of the cup. Darker as it goes behind the front edge, lighter as it comes up towards the back edge. And again, you see me not trying to finish anything, not moving from shape to shape, finishing one thing and then moving to the next. I'm kind of working all over the place, getting an active open paint surface. Sometimes you try to darken something and it just won't work because the paint is wet and it just keeps mixing. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you have to be patient and move on somewhere else until it dries. So there you see me painting the undershadow of the eye. There's light gray or light middle gray around the eye. Then I pull the eye on top. Or I should say pull the protruding part of the eye on top. That way I'm not painting a line around the eye. I'm painting a full shape and then painting the eye so that it creates that line. Smaller strokes here and here to create those textures. I'm looking at the negative shapes around the eyebrows and I see that I don't have enough above the eyebrow, between the eyebrow and the rim of the jug. So I just paint over the rim of the jug, and then I paint the rim back. Some people like to be more precise, some people like to be less precise. I like to be looser because I don't want to entertain my obsessive compulsiveness. Now you see me pulling the teeth forward relative to the dark that's in between the teeth, and then pushing the teeth forward by pulling the back with some darks, and then pulling the lights on top again. So it's really a push and pull. I'm using the corner of my brush, just like I did with the larger brush in the rough end phase, to create some of those textures and smaller lines. Honestly, I'm probably being a little bit more finicky than I should be. So I notice that the right side of the jug is in shadow, so I put down a middle light gray. And then I paint the undertone of the eye, the undertone of the eyebrow with some darker gray. And you can see that I've got all of these different values in discrete little pools on my palette. Cleaning my brush every time, wiping it off, putting more paint down, some of that reflected light. So you see why I put down that dark tone first, so that I can put the light tone on top. Look at how I've really distorted that cup. Painted right over the edge, and I noticed that it was too high, so now I'm bringing it down. And again, I painted the jug over the top, the teeth over the top of that cup, because I know that I can come back just like that and pull the edge of that cup right back over the jug. Then the jug really feels like it's behind instead of painted right up to the edge. Some smaller lights. You'll notice I've almost got the entire surface covered at this point, which, as I said previously, is really important. Before we can move on to stage 4, we have to have a completely opaque paint layer. Notice here I'm putting some dark down and then lightening again the bottom of that cloth, so that I get the contrast that I need. So I put down black, and then I pulled more light. Notice how I just keep going back and forth. I just keep picking up more paint. It's not smearing the paint over large distances. Okay, so this is about where we want to be for the next class, so that we can get to stage 4. Which is the final layer, the detail layer.